The hospital room was silent, except for the sound of a heart monitor. She was 23, in labor, scared, and completely alone. Her husband had promised he'd be back. He never returned. Nurses whispered as they walked past her door. No insurance, no family, another charity case. Bills stacked up on a clipboard at the end of her bed, numbers she could never pay. Just as the doctor was about to make a decision that would change her life forever, the door opened. A man in a tailored suit stepped inside, calm, confident. He looked at the newborn baby, then at the woman on the bed, and he said 5 words that froze the entire room. "Where is my daughter?" In that moment, everything changed. The hospital smelled like antiseptic, metal, and something colder, fear. It clung to the air, sharp and unforgiving, crawling into Emily Carter's lungs every time she tried to breathe through another contraction. The fluorescent lights above her flickered faintly, as if even they were unsure whether they wanted to witness what was happening in that room. Emily lay on the narrow hospital bed, her body trembling, her fingers gripping the thin white sheet like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. The heart monitor beside her bed beeped steadily. Beep, beep, beep. Each sound felt louder than the last. She squeezed her eyes shut as pain tore through her abdomen again, deep, crushing, relentless. Her lips parted as a gasp escaped her throat, followed by a weak cry she tried and failed to suppress. "Breathe, just breathe," she whispered to herself. In through the nose, out through the mouth. That was what the nurse had said earlier, that breathing would help, that it would make things easier. It didn't. Nothing about this felt easy. Her hospital gown clung to her damp skin. Sweat gathered at her temples, sliding down the sides of her face. Her brown hair, once brushed neatly before they left for the hospital, now stuck to her forehead in tangled strands. She turned her head slowly toward the chair beside her bed. Empty. Still empty. The chair had been empty for so long that it felt intentional now, like a statement rather than an absence. Her throat tightened. "Mark?" she called softly, even though she already knew the answer. Silence. Her husband's name hung in the air for a moment before disappearing into nothing. Emily swallowed hard and reached for her phone, resting on the small tray table next to her. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The screen lit up weakly. 3% battery remaining. Her heart sank. She stared at the screen, panic rising in her chest, then tapped on her contacts. There was only one name she wanted to see. Mark. She pressed call. It rang. Once. Twice. Then the call dropped into voicemail. Emily frowned, her breathing becoming shallow. "No, no, please," she murmured, pressing redial. Straight to voicemail. Her grip tightened around the phone as another contraction hit, harder this time. Her back arched slightly as she cried out, her free hand reaching instinctively toward the empty chair beside her bed. As if Mark might suddenly be there, as if he hadn't already walked away. Just a few hours earlier, he had been right there. Mark Carter had stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out at the dark city below. The hospital room lights reflected off the glass, casting his worried expression back at him. "I just need some air," he had said, pacing the room. Emily remembered how he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mark," she had whispered, her voice trembling, "please don't go far." He stopped pacing and finally looked at her. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "I'll be right outside," he said quickly. "I promise." Emily had reached for him then, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. "Promise?" she asked. He nodded. But something about that nod felt wrong. He kissed her forehead and pulled away before she could say anything else. Those were the last moments she saw him. A nurse entered the room now, her shoes squeaking faintly against the floor. She carried a clipboard and glanced briefly at Emily before her eyes drifted, again, to the empty chair. "No family with you?" the nurse asked, her voice neutral, detached. Emily swallowed. "My husband, he stepped out." The nurse hummed quietly, making a note on the clipboard. "And insurance?" she asked. Her chest tightened. "We're still working on it. He was supposed to bring the paperwork." The nurse paused for a fraction of a second, then continued writing. "I'll inform the doctor," she said, already turning toward the door. "Wait," Emily called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The nurse stopped, but didn't face her. "My phone's dying. Could you help me call him?" There was a brief silence, then a sigh. "We're short-staffed tonight. Try again later." The door closed behind her. Emily stared at it, her eyes burning. For the first time that night, tears slipped down her cheeks. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, uncontrollable. Outside the room, voices carried through the thin walls. "She doesn't have full coverage. So, self-pay? Looks like it." Emily squeezed her eyes shut. "Another charity case," someone muttered. The words sliced through her deeper than the pain. She wasn't a charity case. She had worked double shifts at the diner until her feet swelled so badly she could barely stand. She had skipped meals to save money. She had believed Mark every time he said things would work out. "We'll manage," he had said. "We always do." Another contraction crashed into her body, stealing her breath. She cried out, louder this time. No one came. The clock on the wall read 11:58 p.m. Her phone vibrated weakly in her hand. A message. From Mark. Her heart leapt as she unlocked the screen. "I'm freaking out. I can't do this right now." She stared at the words, her vision blurring. Another message appeared. "I need time to think." Her hands trembled as tears spilled freely now. Before she could respond, the screen went dark. Battery dead. Just like that. Emily let out a broken sob, clutching her stomach as pain and panic collided inside her. "I can't do this alone," she whispered. But the room offered no comfort. Minutes later, the doctor entered. He was middle-aged, calm, professional, but there was concern in his eyes. "Emily," he said gently, pulling a stool closer to her bed, "we need to talk." Her heart pounded. "Is my baby okay?" she asked quickly. "We're monitoring closely, but there are some complications." Her fingers curled into fists. "What kind of complications?" "The baby's heart rate is fluctuating," he said, "and your blood pressure is higher than we'd like." Emily's breathing became uneven. "Where's my husband?" she asked. The doctor glanced at the empty chair and didn't answer. "We may need to make some difficult decisions tonight," he said carefully. Fear flooded her chest. "What do you mean, decisions?" Before he could explain, another contraction hit, stronger, sharper. Emily screamed. Far from the hospital, Mark Carter sat alone in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel. The engine was off. The silence inside the car was heavy. He stared straight ahead, his reflection barely visible in the windshield. "This is too much," he whispered to himself. He thought about the bills, the responsibility, the life he hadn't planned for, and instead of turning the car around, he drove away. Back in the hospital room, Emily gasped for air as the contraction passed. Her body shook with exhaustion, fear, and betrayal. She stared at the ceiling, tears sliding into her hairline. Somewhere deep inside her, something shifted, a realization she didn't want to accept. Mark wasn't coming back, and tonight, she would have to become a mother alone. The first cry didn't come right away. Emily noticed that before anyone else did. She lay on the hospital bed, her body weak and shaking, eyes fixed on the space between the doctors as they worked behind a thin blue curtain. Her ears strained for a sound she had imagined 1,000 times, the sharp, desperate cry of her baby entering the world. But the room stayed quiet. Too quiet. Machines beeped, metal clinked, shoes moved quickly across the floor. Voices lowered into urgent whispers. Emily's heart began to race. "Why isn't she crying?" she asked, her voice hoarse. No one answered her. A nurse brushed past her line of sight, adjusting a monitor. The doctor leaned in closer, his brow furrowed, his movements faster now. Emily tried to lift her head, but another wave of weakness pushed her back down onto the pillow. "Please," she whispered, "someone tell me what's happening." Still nothing. Fear wrapped around her chest like a tightening vice. She felt invisible. "Heart rate's unstable," a nurse said quietly. "We need oxygen," another voice replied. Emily caught fragments of their words, each one sharper than the last. Unstable. Oxygen. Now. Her fingers dug into the mattress. "That's my baby," she said, louder now. "That's my daughter." The doctor finally turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. "We're doing everything we can. Just try to stay calm." Calm. The word felt cruel. Her body had just been torn apart, her husband had disappeared, and now the one thing she had held on to, the belief that at least her baby would be okay, was slipping away. She felt tears spill down the sides of her face as she stared at the ceiling, keeping from screaming. 1, 2, 3. Then, a sound. Soft, weak, but real. A cry. Emily sobbed. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. But the relief was short-lived. The cry faded almost as quickly as it had come. "We're taking her to the NICU," the doctor said firmly. Emily's eyes widened. "What? No, wait, can I see her?" she pleaded. The curtain shifted slightly, just enough for Emily to catch a glimpse of tiny fingers and dark hair before her baby was lifted and carried away. "Please," Emily cried, "please let me hold her, just for a second." "I'm sorry," the nurse said without slowing down. "We don't have time." And just like that, her daughter was gone. The room felt suddenly empty again. Too empty. Emily's sobs turned silent, her body too exhausted to fight anymore. Hours passed in fragments. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, waking to the hum of machines and the dull ache that pulsed through her entire body. Each time she opened her eyes, she hoped, irrationally, that Mark would be there. He never was. When she finally woke fully, the room was dim, lit only by a small lamp near the door. Her throat felt dry, her limbs heavy. A nurse entered quietly, adjusting an IV. "Where's my baby?" Emily asked immediately. The nurse hesitated. "She's stable," she said, "in the NICU. Can I see her?" "Not yet." Emily swallowed. "Why not?" The nurse glanced at the clipboard. "Doctor's orders." Emily turned her face away, staring at the wall. She felt powerless. Later that morning, a woman in a gray suit entered the room. She carried a folder and wore a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Emily Carter?" she asked. "Yes," Emily replied cautiously. I'm from hospital administration, the woman said, pulling up a chair. We need to discuss some paperwork. Emily's heart sank. Paperwork? She repeated. Yes, billing, insurance, payment options. I just had surgery. My baby is in the NICU. I understand, the woman replied, flipping open the folder, but we need to address these matters promptly. She slid a document across the table. Emily glanced at it and felt dizzy. Numbers filled the page, more zeros than she had ever seen attached to her name. I can't pay this, Emily whispered. The woman nodded sympathetically. We do offer financial assistance programs. Emily looked up. Will that affect my baby's care? The woman hesitated. Care decisions are complex, especially in cases without full coverage. Emily's stomach dropped. So, because I'm poor, my daughter suffers? She said, her voice trembling. That's not what I said, the woman replied quickly. But resources are limited. Emily clenched her fists. She didn't ask to be born, and neither did I. The woman closed the folder. We'll be in touch. And then she was gone. Emily cried that night. Not the quiet tears she had shed before. These were deep, shaking sobs that came from a place she didn't know existed inside her. She pressed her face into the pillow, biting down to keep from screaming. She felt like she had failed. Failed her baby, failed herself, failed to choose the right man. In the NICU, her daughter lay in an incubator, wires attached to her tiny chest, machines breathing softly for her. A nurse stood nearby, watching the monitors. She's strong, the nurse murmured to herself, but strength alone wouldn't pay the bills. The next day, Emily was finally wheeled into the NICU. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw her daughter for the first time, clearly. She was so small, smaller than Emily had imagined. Her skin was delicate, almost translucent, her chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. Emily reached out, her finger trembling as it touched her daughter's hand. "So this is you," she whispered. "Hi, I'm your mom." Her daughter's fingers curled weakly around Emily's. Emily broke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you better." A doctor approached quietly. "We need to talk about next steps," he said. Emily looked up, dread settling in her chest. "Her care will require extended monitoring," he continued. "That means time, equipment, specialists." Emily nodded slowly. "And money," she said. The doctor didn't deny it. "We'll do what we can," he said, "but without financial backing—" "I understand," Emily interrupted. Because she did. In this world, compassion had limits. That evening, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her childhood, growing up without a father, watching her mother struggle, always choosing between rent and groceries. She had promised herself her child would never live that life. And yet, here she was, alone. Again. Somewhere across the city, in a quiet penthouse overlooking the skyline, a man stood by a window, phone pressed to his ear. "She delivered," a voice on the other end said. "Complications, the baby's in the NICU." The man closed his eyes briefly. "And the mother?" he asked. "She's alone." There was a pause. "Keep watching and don't let anything happen to them." He ended the call and stared out at the city lights. It was almost time. Back in the hospital, Emily sat beside the incubator, whispering promises to her daughter. "I don't know how, but I will find a way." She didn't see the security camera quietly adjusting its angle. She didn't know she wasn't as alone as she thought. Not anymore. The bills didn't arrive all at once. They came quietly, politely, like reminders of a truth Emily Carter was already trying not to face. It started with a thin envelope left on the tray table beside her bed. No knock, no explanation, just her name printed neatly on the front, black ink against white paper. Emily Carter, room 417. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside were numbers that didn't feel real, charges for the delivery room, charges for emergency procedures, charges for medication she didn't remember agreeing to, and then a separate page, NICU Care Daily Rate. Her chest tightened. She flipped the page, hoping she had misunderstood. She hadn't. Emily's hands began to shake as she folded the papers back into the envelope. Her body still ached from childbirth, but this pain? This was different. This was heavier. It pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She set the envelope aside as if it might explode. Later that morning, a nurse entered to check her vitals. She was younger than the others, her movements softer, her eyes kinder. "You doing okay?" the nurse asked gently. Emily nodded automatically. The nurse hesitated, then glanced at the envelope. "They gave you the paperwork already?" the nurse asked. Emily swallowed. "Yes." The nurse sighed quietly. "I'm sorry." That single sentence nearly broke her. "Is my baby okay?" Emily asked, quickly changing the subject. "She's stable," the nurse replied. "Still needs monitoring, but she's a fighter." Emily smiled faintly. She gets that from her mother. The nurse smiled back, but there was sadness behind it. By the third day, the envelopes had multiplied, one on the tray table, one slipped under the door, another handed to her by a woman who smiled too much. Emily stopped opening them. She didn't need to. She already knew what they said. The hospital administration office smelled like coffee and printer ink. Emily sat in a stiff chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as a man in a blue tie scrolled through numbers on a computer screen. "So," he said, finally, turning the monitor slightly toward her, "based on current projections, your total balance is substantial." Emily stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process the amount. "I don't have that kind of money," she said quietly. He nodded, unsurprised. "Most people don't." She looked up at him. "Then what happens?" He leaned back slightly. "We explore options." "What kind of options?" "Well," he said carefully, "payment plans, assistance programs, or early discharge." Her heart skipped. "Discharge?" she repeated. "My baby is in the NICU." He nodded again, "which is precisely why we need to discuss sustainability." Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So you're saying," she said slowly, "that if I can't pay, my baby might not get the care she needs?" The man hesitated, just long enough. "We do our best within the system," he said. The system. Emily stood up, her legs trembling. "My daughter is not a line item," she said. "She's a human being." The man didn't respond. That night, Emily sat beside the incubator, staring at her daughter's tiny chest rising and falling. "How much do you cost?" she whispered bitterly, then immediately shook her head. "No," she said softly. "That's not fair. None of this is your fault." Her daughter stirred slightly, her fingers curling weakly. Emily reached in and let her baby grasp her finger. "I would sell everything," Emily whispered, if I had anything to sell. She tried calling Mark again that night. She borrowed a charger from a nurse, her phone lighting up slowly as it powered on. Her hands trembled as she typed his number. It rang. Once, twice, then voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She didn't have the strength. By the end of the week, the tone changed. Nurses stopped lingering, doctors became shorter with their explanations, administrators appeared more frequently. Emily noticed it all. She felt it in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, in the way people avoided eye contact. She was becoming a problem. Ms. Carter, a woman from Billings said one afternoon, standing at the foot of her bed, "We need to finalize some decisions." "What kind of decisions?" The woman glanced at the clipboard. "About continued care." "For my baby?" "Yes." Emily sat up straighter. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying," she replied, lowering her voice, "that extended NICU care without financial backing is difficult to justify." Emily's heart pounded. "Justify?" she repeated. "You're talking about my daughter's life." The woman sighed. "We're talking about reality." Emily laughed softly, a hollow, broken sound. "Reality," she echoed. "Reality is that her father ran away. Reality is that I'm alone. Reality is that you see me as a number." The man didn't respond. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the hospital, the distant beeping, the footsteps, the muffled cries from other rooms. She wondered how many other women lay awake, calculating the cost of survival. In the NICU, a senior doctor reviewed charts quietly. "She's improving," he said to a nurse. "That's good news," the nurse replied. "Yes," he said, "but improvement doesn't always change outcomes." The nurse frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Administrative pressure." On the 7th day, Emily was called back into the administration office. This time, there were two people waiting. One of them slid a document across the table. "What's this?" Emily asked. "Consent forms, standard procedure." Emily scanned the first page. Her breath caught. "This says limited intervention," she whispered. "It's a precaution," the woman said quickly, "in case of complications." Emily pushed the paper back. "I'm not signing this," she said. The man's jaw tightened. "Ms. Carter?" "My daughter deserves every chance," Emily snapped. "I don't care how much it costs." The room fell silent. Finally, the woman spoke. "Then you need financial backing," she said plainly. Emily stood up. "I'll find it," she said. "How?" the man asked. Emily didn't answer. She didn't know. That night, Emily stood alone in the hallway outside the NICU, staring through the glass at her daughter. She felt small, powerless, and angry. But beneath the fear, something else was growing. Resolve. She placed her hand on the glass. "I'm not giving up," she whispered, "no matter what it takes." High above the city, the man in the penthouse listened to the report in silence. "They're pressuring her, financially." The man's expression darkened. "How far?" "Consent forms, limited care discussions." The man exhaled slowly. "That's enough," he said. He ended the call and turned toward the window. Light stretched endlessly below him. "For too long," he murmured. Back in the hospital, Emily returned to her room to find yet another envelope waiting. She didn't open it. She already knew. The price of a life had been decided, and she was running out of time. Mark Carter didn't remember when he stopped driving. He only remembered sitting there. The car was parked on the side of a quiet street, the engine off, the dashboard lights dim. Somewhere nearby, a street lamp flickered, buzzing softly like it was struggling to stay awake, just like him. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel. "I can't do this," he whispered. The words felt thin, weak, but they were all he had. His phone lay on the passenger seat, screen dark. He hadn't turned it on since leaving the hospital. Not after sending that message, not after the second one. I need time to think. Time? As if time could fix what he was too afraid to face. Earlier that night, when the nurse had first asked about insurance, Mark felt something crack inside his chest. He hadn't said anything then. He had just nodded, pretending confidence, pretending adulthood. But inside, panic had spread like poison. Bills, responsibility, a life that depended on him. He had grown up watching his own father drown under those same words. Mark was 10 when the eviction notice appeared on their apartment door. His mother had stood there reading it, silent, her hand trembling. His father had been sitting on the couch, staring at the television like nothing mattered. That night, Mark overheard them arguing. "We can't keep living like this," his mother cried. "I'm doing the best I can," his father snapped. "No, you're not. You're running." Mark pressed his ear against the bedroom wall, heart pounding. The next morning, his father was gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no explanation. Just absence. Mark swore he would never be like him. He swore he would be better. But promises were easy when you were young and didn't understand the weight of them. The hospital hallway replayed in Mark's mind. Emily's face, pale, scared, trusting. "Please don't go far," she had whispered. And he had lied. "I'll be right outside." The truth was, the moment he stepped into the hallway, the fear became unbearable. The smell of disinfectant, the sound of crying babies, the quiet urgency in the nurses' voices, it all felt like a countdown. He had paced back and forth, hand shaking, trying to convince himself to go back inside. Then his phone buzzed. A bank alert. Insufficient funds. That was when he broke. Mark turned the car key slightly, then stopped. If he went back, everything would become real. If he stayed away, maybe it wouldn't. That was the lie he told himself. Emily's calls had come through while he was driving. He saw the screen light up. Emily calling. Once. Twice. He ignored it. By the third time, he turned the phone face down. He told himself he would answer later. He told himself she was strong. He told himself a lot of things. Mark drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. The room smelled like stale smoke and old carpet. He sat on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall. His phone buzzed again. A message. "I'm freaking out. I can't do this right now." He stared at the words before sending them. Then another message. "I need time to think." As soon as the screen went dark, regret punched him in the gut. But he didn't go back. The next morning, Mark woke up with a headache and a sense of dread so heavy it made him nauseous. He turned on his phone. Dozens of missed calls. From Emily, from unknown hospital numbers. He scrolled through them, his heart racing. Then he turned the phone off again. "I'll deal with it later," he muttered. But later never came. Days passed. Mark avoided the hospital, avoided his apartment, avoided anything that reminded him of what he had done. He told himself Emily would figure it out, that hospitals had programs, that babies were resilient. That lie kept him functional. Barely. One evening, he sat in a bar staring into a glass of cheap whiskey. A man beside him laughed loudly, showing pictures of his newborn on his phone. "Changed my whole life," the man said proudly. Mark forced a smile. "That's great," he said, but his chest burned. Mark's mother called him that night. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I've been busy," he replied. "Busy doing what?" she asked. "I heard Emily had the baby." His throat tightened. "She did," he said quietly. "Then why are you here and not with your family?" she snapped. He didn't answer. There was a long silence on the line. "Mark," she said softly now, "don't do what your father did." The words hit harder than she knew. "I'm not him," Mark said quickly. "Then go back," she replied. He ended the call. That night, Mark dreamed of a crying baby he couldn't reach. He woke up sweating. For the first time since leaving the hospital, he felt something other than fear: shame. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Emily sat beside the incubator, unaware of where Mark was, or who he was becoming. She didn't know he replayed her face in his mind every night. She didn't know he almost drove back more than once. Almost. Mark stood outside the hospital one afternoon, days later. He watched families walk in and out, fathers carrying balloons, mothers holding flowers. He stayed across the street, too afraid to cross. Inside, Emily signed another form with trembling hands. She didn't write Mark's name anywhere. She left that space blank. Mark finally drove away. Not because he wanted to, because staying nearby hurt too much. He packed his clothes into a single suitcase and left town. No goodbye, no note. Just like his father. Months from now, he would tell himself he had no choice, that life forced his hand, that he wasn't strong enough. But deep down, he would always know the truth. He had chosen himself over his family. High above the city, a man reviewed a file quietly. Name: Mark Carter. Status: absent. The man closed the folder slowly. "So," he said to himself, "this is the one who ran." His expression hardened. Cowards always think disappearing ends the story. He picked up his phone. "Keep track of him," he said calmly. "He'll matter later." Back in the hospital, Emily kissed her daughter's tiny forehead through the incubator opening. "You have me," she whispered, "even if no one else stays." She didn't know it yet, but the man who vanished had set something in motion, and consequences, unlike people, always return. Emily Carter didn't notice the cameras. Most people didn't. They were small, tucked into corners, disguised as part of the hospital's security system. Just another quiet eye watching hallways, elevators, waiting rooms, installed for safety, for protocol. But some eyes watched more closely than others. On the 12th floor of a glass tower overlooking the city, a man stood silently before a wall of screens. Each screen showed a different angle of the hospital: the NICU hallway, the reception desk, room 417. He stood with his hands behind his back, posture straight, expression unreadable. His suit was dark, perfectly tailored, the kind that didn't wrinkle no matter how long it was worn. A watch gleamed faintly at his wrist, simple, elegant, expensive. He watched Emily sit beside the incubator. He watched her rest her forehead against the glass. He watched her whisper words no microphone could hear. The man exhaled slowly. "So," he murmured, "it finally happened." A younger man stood a few steps behind him, holding a tablet. "Complications during delivery," the younger man said, "but both survived." The older man closed his eyes briefly. "And the father?" he asked. The younger man hesitated. "He left. Hasn't returned." A muscle in the older man's jaw tightened. "Of course he did," he said quietly. Emily leaned closer to the incubator, her finger brushing the soft edge of the opening. "I wish I could explain this to you," she whispered to her daughter. "Why everything feels so heavy." Her daughter stirred faintly, her tiny chest rising and falling. Emily smiled weakly. "You don't have to understand yet. You just have to live." Back in the tower, the man watched as a nurse entered the NICU and spoke to Emily. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He recognized the posture. The nurse's shoulders were tense, Emily's head lowered. Bad news. "Financial pressure increasing," the younger man said, reading from the tablet. "Administration is pushing hard." The older man's eyes darkened. "How hard?" he asked. "They're discussing limited intervention," the younger man replied. Consent forms were presented. Silence filled the room. Then, "That won't happen," the older man said. Not loudly, not angrily, just definitively. The younger man nodded. "Do you want me to step in?" "Not yet," the older man replied. "Not directly." He turned away from the screens and walked toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below him, lights flickering like stars trapped on the ground. "I need to see how far they'll push her," he said, "and how she responds." The younger man hesitated. "Sir, she's alone." The older man's reflection stared back at him in the glass. "So was her mother," he said quietly. Emily was discharged 2 days later. Not because she was ready, because the hospital needed the bed. She stood in the lobby, holding a small bag of belongings, staring at the doors that separated her from the NICU. Her daughter remained inside. "You can visit during scheduled hours," the nurse said politely. Emily nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Outside, the city felt louder, colder. Emily sat on a bench near the entrance, wrapping her arms around herself. She checked her phone again. No messages, no missed calls. Mark was gone. Across the street, a black car idled quietly. The windows were tinted. Inside, a driver waited. "Is that her?" the driver asked softly into his earpiece. "Yes," came the calm reply. "That's her." Emily stood and walked away, unaware of the eyes following her. That night, Emily returned to her tiny apartment. The lights flickered when she turned them on. The refrigerator hummed loudly, almost accusingly. She sank onto the couch and stared at the wall. For the first time since the delivery, there were no machines beeping, no nurses nearby. Just silence. She broke down. She cried for the baby she couldn't hold, for the husband who vanished, for the life that felt stolen before it even began. She cried until her chest hurt and her throat burned, and when she finally slept, exhaustion claimed her without dreams. The man in the tower didn't sleep. He reviewed files instead. Old ones. Photos faded with time, documents stamped and restamped, a life carefully erased and rebuilt. He stopped on one image. A younger woman. Emily. Years ago. His fingers hovered over the screen. "You look just like her mother," he whispered. The next morning, Emily returned to the hospital early. She stood outside the NICU doors waiting for visiting hours to begin. A security guard nodded at her. "You're early again," he said. She smiled faintly. "I always am." Inside the NICU, her daughter's condition remained stable, but fragile. Emily sat beside her, reading softly from a children's book someone had donated. She didn't know if her daughter could hear, but she read anyway. That afternoon, a woman from administration approached her. "Miss Carter," she said carefully, "we need to revisit the financial discussion." Emily felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach. "I told you," she said quietly. "I don't have the money." The woman hesitated. "There may be alternative solutions." Emily looked up. "Like what?" The woman glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Sometimes," she said, "private benefactors step in." Emily frowned. "Why would anyone do that for me?" The woman didn't answer. High above the city, the older man watched that conversation unfold. "She's asking the right question," he said. The younger man nodded. "Should I arrange a meeting?" The older man considered it. "Not yet," he said again. "She needs to believe the help comes without strings." "And the hospital?" the younger man asked. The older man's lips curved slightly. "They'll behave. Soon." That evening, Emily found an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Not white, cream-colored, heavy paper. Her name written neatly on the front. No return address. Her heart pounded as she picked it up. Inside was a single card. "You are not alone. Help is coming." No signature, no explanation. Emily stared at the words for a long time. Her hands trembled. For the first time since the hospital, she felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Across the city, the man watched her reaction on a silent screen. "That was risky," the younger man said. The older man nodded. "Necessary." He turned away. "Prepare everything," he said calmly. "When I step into that hospital," he paused, "nothing will ever be the same." Back in her apartment, Emily clutched the card to her chest. "I don't know who you are," she whispered into the empty room, "but thank you." She didn't know the truth yet. She didn't know the stranger watching from afar wasn't really a stranger at all, and she didn't know that the next time she walked into that hospital, power would walk in with her. The hospital moved the same way it always did. Stretchers rolled down hallways. Nurses walked quickly, eyes focused, voices low. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms, marking time without emotion. To the building itself, this was just another day. But to Emily Carter, this morning felt different. She couldn't explain why. She stood outside the NICU doors, clutching her purse tightly, the cream-colored card folded carefully inside. "You are not alone." The words echoed in her mind as she waited for visiting hours to begin. Hope felt dangerous, but it was there. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the front doors of the hospital slid open. A man stepped inside. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He walked with calm, deliberate confidence, like someone who expected the world to make room for him. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. No hospital badge, no visitor sticker, just quiet authority. Behind him followed two men, one younger, carrying a slim briefcase, the other scanning the surroundings with practiced awareness. The receptionist looked up. Her posture straightened instantly. "Good morning, sir," she said, her tone suddenly polite. "How may I help you?" The man stopped at the desk. "I'm here for a patient," he said calmly. "Name?" she asked, already typing. He leaned slightly forward. "Emily Carter." The receptionist paused. She looked up again, really looked at him this time. "Yes," she said quickly. She's currently visiting the NICU." "I know," he replied. Word traveled fast. By the time the elevator doors closed behind him, nurses were already whispering. "Who is that? Is he administration? No, Administration doesn't dress like that. On the third floor, a senior doctor felt his phone vibrate. A message appeared. Important visitor arrived, front desk. He frowned. Emily sat beside the incubator, reading softly. The little engine thought it could, she whispered, smiling faintly. And it did. Her daughter's tiny chest rose and fell, wires tracing her fragile strength. Emily looked up when she sensed movement behind her. The doctor stood near the doorway, unusually tense. "Miss Carter," he said, "may I speak with you?" Her heart skipped. "Is something wrong?" she asked, standing quickly. "No," he replied, "not exactly." Before he could explain further, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Slow. Measured. Emily turned. The man stopped just a few feet away. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. He looked at the incubator, then at Emily. His gaze softened, not professionally, not politely, but personally, deeply. And then he spoke. "Where is my daughter?" The words fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Silence followed. The doctor froze. The nurse's hand hovered mid-air. Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. The man stepped closer to the incubator. He looked at the baby with something that looked dangerously close to pain. "I said," he repeated calmly, "where is my daughter?" The doctor cleared his throat. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." The man turned to him. "There hasn't," he said. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a folded document, handing it over. The doctor read it. His face drained of color. I wasn't aware," the doctor stammered. "You weren't meant to be," he replied. Emily's heart pounded violently. "What is going on?" she asked. The man turned back to her. "Emily," he said gently, saying her name like it mattered. "I know this is overwhelming." She stared at him. "Who are you?" He took a breath. "My name is William Hale, and I am your father." The words didn't make sense. They crashed into her without meaning. "My father?" she repeated. "Yes." "That's impossible," she whispered. "My mother said—" "I know what she said, and I know why." Emily shook her head, tears welling. "You can't just walk in here and say that." "I can," he said softly, "and I did." Outside the NICU, administrators gathered. Phones buzzed. Whispers turned frantic. "That's William Hale." "The William Hale? Why is he here?" The hospital director arrived, breathless. "Mr. Hale," she said, forcing a smile, "we weren't informed of your visit." William looked at her calmly. "You're informed now." Back inside, Emily struggled to breathe. "You watched me suffer," she said, anger rising through the shock. "You let them treat me like nothing." William's jaw tightened. "I watched," he admitted, "and I waited." "For what?" she demanded. "For me to beg?" "For you to survive," he said, "the way your mother did." Emily laughed bitterly. "I almost didn't." "I know," he said, "and that's on me." He looked at the incubator again. "But it ends now." The hospital director stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Hale," she said, "about the outstanding balances?" William raised a hand. "Erased," he said simply. The director blinked. "Pardon?" "All of it," William repeated. "Every charge. Past, present, future." The director nodded quickly. "Of course." Emily stared at them. Just like that, everything changed. Nurses straightened. Doctors softened their voices. Administrators smiled. Emily felt dizzy. "You can't buy this away," she said to William. He met her gaze. "I'm not buying you," he said. "I'm protecting my family." Family. The word echoed painfully. Moments later, a nurse gently lifted the baby. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "would you like to hold your daughter?" Emily froze. Yes," she whispered. For the first time since giving birth, her daughter was placed in her arms. Emily sobbed. William watched silently, his eyes glistening. Outside, phones rang non-stop. News traveled. William Hale had entered the hospital, and nothing inside those walls would ever be the same again. Emily didn't sit down. She couldn't. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her daughter, as if letting go, even for a second, might cause everything to disappear. The warmth of the tiny body against her chest felt unreal, like something borrowed from a dream. William Hale stood a few steps away, giving her space he hadn't earned yet. The room was quiet now. Too quiet. Finally, Emily spoke. "My mother told me my father was dead," she said flatly. William nodded once. "I know." She looked up sharply. "You know? And you just let me believe that?" "I let her believe it," he replied, "and she let you." Emily laughed bitterly. "That's not an answer." William took a breath. For the first time since entering the hospital, his calm faltered. "Your mother's name was Anna," he said softly. "She was the strongest person I ever knew." Emily's grip tightened on her baby. "She worked 3 jobs," Emily said. "She died tired." William closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. "She did." They sat then. Not together. Opposite sides of the room, like strangers bound by something heavier than blood. William began. "I was not always who I am now," he said. "There was a time when power was something I chased, not something I controlled." Emily didn't interrupt. He continued. "I was married, young, ambitious. My wife came from a family that believed reputation mattered more than truth." Emily felt a chill. "When Anna became pregnant," William said, "my world split in two." Emily looked down at her daughter. "I wanted to do the right thing," William said, "but the people around me, they didn't." He told her about contracts disguised as kindness, about lawyers who spoke softly while erasing lives with ink, about a choice presented as protection. "They told me," he said, "that if I acknowledged you publicly, Anna would be destroyed. No job, no support, no safety." Emily's jaw clenched. "So you chose yourself," she said. William nodded slowly. "At first." "And then?" she demanded. "And then I tried to fix it. Too late." Anna had disappeared. Not vanished, relocated. New city, new name, no forwarding address. William searched for years. "I found you when you were 13, he said quietly. "By accident." Emily's breath caught. "You watched me?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Long enough to know you were surviving. Long enough to know intervening would have destroyed the fragile life your mother built." Emily shook her head, tears streaming now. "You let me grow up poor. You let me struggle. You let me marry the wrong man because I didn't know what safety looked like." William's voice broke. "Yes." Silence filled the room again. Emily stood abruptly. "You don't get to call yourself my father," she said. "Not after that." William didn't argue. "I know," he said. "That title isn't mine to take." He looked at the baby. "But I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to protect her." Emily walked to the window, her back to him. "I hated my father," she said quietly. "Not you. The idea of him. The man who left." William swallowed. "I never left willingly." She turned, eyes blazing. "You still left." "Yes," he said, "and that will always be true." A nurse knocked gently and entered. "Everything okay?" she asked. Emily nodded, wiping her face. "Yes." The nurse smiled at the baby. "She's beautiful." Emily looked down. "She is," she whispered. William watched the exchange, a man standing at the edge of something fragile. Later, when the room was empty again, Emily spoke without looking at him. "What happens now?" she asked. William stood. "Now, you decide." "Decide what?" "How much space I get in your life, if any." Emily turned slowly. "And if I say none?" William nodded. "Then I leave." She studied him. "And the money?" she asked sharply. William met her gaze. "Stays. No conditions." Emily laughed softly. "You know what scares me the most?" she said. William waited. "That one day," she continued, "I'll need you, and I won't know if that makes me weak or human." William's eyes filled. "It makes you honest," he said. Emily looked down at her daughter again. "She deserves better than secrets," Emily said. William nodded. "She will have truth." Emily took a long breath. "Then you start by telling me everything," she said. "No more half-stories." William exhaled slowly. "Then stay," he said, "and I will." Outside the room, unseen, a nurse paused. She glanced back at the closed door, sensing something monumental had shifted. Inside, a family, broken, unfinished, complicated, sat with the truth for the first time, and truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back. The change was immediate, not loud, not announced, but unmistakable. By the next morning, the hospital felt like a different place. Emily noticed it the moment she walked through the front doors. The receptionist stood straighter. A nurse smiled, actually smiled. Her name was spoken gently now, carefully, as if it mattered. "Good morning, Miss Carter." Not room 417, not the NICU mother, Miss Carter. Emily paused for a second, confused by the sudden respect. William walked beside her, quiet, observant. "You see it too," he said softly. Emily nodded. "They're afraid." William shook his head slightly. "No, they're aware." In the administrative wing, panic moved faster than paperwork. "Legal wants a full review. Erase everything, now." Who authorized those consent forms? Files were pulled, emails were deleted, phone calls were made in hushed voices. The hospital director stood in her office, hands clasped tightly as she listened to a calm voice on speakerphone. "We trust this will be handled discreetly," the voice said. "Yes, of course," she replied quickly. "We take patient dignity very seriously." The line went dead. She exhaled sharply. "This never happened," she whispered to herself. Back in the NICU, Emily held her daughter without asking permission. No one stopped her. A nurse adjusted a blanket gently. "Take all the time you need." Emily looked up, surprised. "Thank you," she said. The nurse hesitated, then added softly, "She's lucky to have you." Emily swallowed hard. For the first time, someone wasn't measuring her worth. Doctors now explained things carefully. No rushing, no dismissive tones. "We recommend another week of observation," one said, "just to be safe." Emily braced herself instinctively. "And the cost?" she asked. The doctor smiled faintly. "Already handled." Emily felt her chest tighten. Handled. That word carried weight. William watched quietly as Emily navigated the new reality. "You don't like it," he said later. Emily shook her head. "I don't like how fast people change when money enters the room." "That," William said, "is one of its ugliest truths." Across town, Mark Carter stared at his phone in disbelief. Missed calls, voicemails, emails from numbers he didn't recognize. One message stood out. Subject: legal inquiry. His stomach dropped. He hadn't told anyone where he went, so how did they find him? Mark sat on the edge of his motel bed, the walls closing in. He listened to the voicemail again. "This is regarding your legal and financial obligations connected to Emily Carter and her child." He stopped it. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He had convinced himself that leaving meant escaping consequences. He was wrong. Back at the hospital, William met privately with the director. "We've corrected the billing situation," she said quickly, "and staff have been re-educated." William nodded. "Good. And Ms. Carter's husband?" she asked cautiously. William's eyes hardened. "He is no longer relevant to her care," he said, "but he is relevant to the truth." The director understood. She said nothing more. Emily stood in the NICU hallway later that day, staring through the glass. She felt conflicted. Relief, anger, gratitude, suspicion. "You don't have to trust me yet," William said quietly beside her, "but you should trust this. No one will ever make decisions for you again." Emily turned to him. "What if I don't want you fighting my battles?" she asked. William met her gaze. "Then I'll stand behind you instead." That answer surprised her. That evening, Emily received a call. An unfamiliar number. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Miss Carter," a woman's voice said. "This is Family Court Services. We need to speak with you regarding your marital status and custody considerations." Emily's heart pounded. "I didn't file anything," she said. "We did," the woman replied, "on your behalf." Emily looked at William. He shook his head slightly. "Not me." Miles away, Mark's door was knocked on sharply. He froze. The knock came again, louder. He opened the door slowly. Two men stood outside. "Mark Carter?" one asked. "Yes?" "You need to come with us." "For what?" Mark stammered. "For abandonment and fraud." Mark's knees weakened. Back in the hospital, Emily sat alone in her room that night. She stared at the city lights through the window. Power had shifted, but peace hadn't arrived. Not yet. She whispered to her daughter, "Just because things are easier now doesn't mean they're healed." William stood by the window in his penthouse later that night. "Everything's in motion," his assistant said. "Hospitals, courts, finances." William nodded. "Good. And Emily?" the assistant asked. William looked away. "She has to choose me, not the other way around." Emily closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. For the first time since the night she was left alone, she slept without fear of tomorrow. But somewhere in the city, Mark Carter learned the final lesson he had tried to outrun. Running doesn't erase responsibility. It only delays it. Emily didn't expect to see Mark again. Not like this. Not sitting across a cold metal table in a quiet room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and paperwork. Not with his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow, and his confidence completely gone. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her hand resting against the frame. This was the man she had once trusted with her life. The man who promised to stay. Mark looked up. Their eyes met. He flinched. "I didn't know if you'd come," Mark said quietly. Emily closed the door behind her and took a seat opposite him. Her movements were calm, controlled, almost distant. "I didn't know if I should," she replied. There was a long silence. Mark swallowed. "How's the baby?" Emily held his gaze. Alive. That single word carried more weight than a paragraph ever could. Mark's face crumpled. "I messed up," he whispered. Emily said nothing. "I was scared," he continued. "I didn't know how to be what you needed." She leaned forward slightly. "So you disappeared." "I thought," he began. "You thought about yourself," Emily interrupted, her voice steady but sharp. "That's the truth. Say it." Mark's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," he said. "I thought about myself." He rubbed his hands together nervously. "I got your messages," he said. "All of them." Emily's jaw tightened. "And?" "And I was ashamed," he replied. "I didn't know how to come back after that." Emily laughed softly, bitterly. "You don't come back from leaving a woman alone on a hospital bed," she said. "You don't undo that." Mark nodded slowly. "I know." Outside the room, a guard stood quietly. Inside, Emily felt the weight of every choice pressing against her chest. "I lost everything that night. My sense of safety, my trust, my marriage." Mark looked down. "And yet," Emily continued, "I gained something too." She paused. "I found out who I am." Mark looked up at her then, really looked. She wasn't shaking, she wasn't pleading. She was standing. "I heard about your father," Mark said hesitantly. Emily's expression didn't change. "You don't get to speak about him." "That's fair," Mark said quickly. You just want absolution," Emily said, "and you think saying sorry will give it to you." Mark shook his head. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "No," Emily agreed. "You don't." The word hung between them. Mark closed his eyes, as if bracing for impact. "But," Emily continued softly, "this isn't about punishment." Mark looked at her, confused. "This is about responsibility," she said. "You don't get to erase what you did by disappearing, or by suffering now." Tears slid down Mark's face. "I'll do anything," he said. "I'll sign whatever you want." Emily studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke the words that surprised them both. "I don't want revenge." Mark froze. "I want distance," she continued, "and accountability." She slid a folder across the table. Mark stared at it. "What's this?" he asked. "Legal separation, custody agreement, financial responsibility," Emily said calmly. "You will support your daughter. You will not appear in her life unless she chooses it one day." Mark's hands trembled as he opened the folder. "And you?" he asked. Emily met his gaze. "I am done," she said. Mark nodded slowly. "I deserve that," he said. Emily stood. "One more thing," she added. He looked up. "You don't get to call her your father," she said. "Not now, not ever. Biology doesn't make you a parent." Mark's shoulders shook as he nodded. "I understand." Later that day, Emily sat alone in the hospital chapel. She hadn't planned to come here, but she needed quiet. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time, she didn't feel anger toward Mark, just clarity. William waited outside. When she finally emerged, he stood slowly. "You okay?" he asked gently. Emily nodded. "I am now." She looked at him. "I made my choice," she said. William didn't speak. "I don't want him in her life," Emily continued, "but I also don't want hatred to raise my daughter." William inclined his head. "That's wisdom." That night, Emily held her daughter close. "I stood up today," she whispered, "for both of us." Her daughter stirred softly. Emily smiled. Justice had been served, but not the kind that destroys, the kind that draws a line. Across the city, Mark Carter signed the papers with shaking hands. Each signature felt like a final door closing. He stared at his reflection in the glass afterward. For the first time, he didn't look away. Back in the hospital, Emily stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. She had faced the man who abandoned her, and she had walked away stronger. Justice had a price, and she had paid it in courage. The first time Emily brought her daughter home, it didn't feel real. The apartment was the same, small, quiet, imperfect. The couch still had a loose leg. The kitchen light flickered when turned on. The world outside hadn't changed, but everything inside her had. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, holding her baby close, breathing in the scent of something new, something fragile, something sacred. "We're home," she whispered. Her daughter stirred softly, her tiny fingers curling against Emily's chest. The first weeks passed slowly. Sleepless nights, soft cries, moments of panic followed by overwhelming love. Emily learned the rhythm of her daughter's breathing, the way her chest rose and fell, the tiny noises she made before waking. She learned how to be tired and strong at the same time. William didn't move in. He didn't offer to. Instead, he showed up quietly. Groceries appeared at the door. A crib arrived, fully assembled. Medical appointments were scheduled, but only after Emily approved them. No pressure, just presence. One afternoon, as Emily rocked her daughter by the window, William stood nearby, hands folded behind his back. "She has your eyes," he said. Emily smiled faintly. "People keep saying that." He hesitated. "May I hold her?" Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. William's hands trembled as he took the baby, holding her as if she were made of glass. "Hello, I'm William. Not grandfather, not father, just a man trying to begin." Months passed. Emily returned to work part-time, on her terms, a new job, flexible hours, respect. She walked into meetings differently now. She stood straighter. She spoke without apology. One evening, Emily found a small wooden box on her table. Inside were letters, dozens of them, unsent. William stood quietly behind her. "I wrote them over the years," he said. "To you, to your mother, to the daughter I didn't know how to reach." Emily ran her fingers over the pages. "Why give them to me now?" she asked. "Because you don't owe me forgiveness," William said, "but you deserve the truth." Emily nodded slowly. "I'll read them," she said, "when I'm ready." Her daughter's first laugh came on an ordinary Tuesday. Emily cried harder than she had in the hospital. William laughed softly through tears. In that moment, the past loosened its grip. Years later, Emily would tell her daughter the story. Not the version filled with bitterness, but the one filled with honesty. You were born into chaos, she would say, but you were raised with intention. Mark Carter never came back. He sent checks. He stayed away. Emily never spoke his name in anger, only in closure. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Emily stood on a balcony overlooking a life she had rebuilt. William stood beside her. "I won't ask for more than you give," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "That's why you're still here," she replied. She looked down at her daughter playing on the floor, laughing freely, and for the first time, Emily understood something deeply and completely. Legacy isn't about wealth. It's about what you choose to pass on. Emily bent down and lifted her daughter into her arms. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're loved, and you'll never wonder if you matter." Her daughter laughed again, and the world, once cold and unforgiving, felt finally, undeniably warm. He left her at her weakest, but she raised a child strong enough to change generations.